That's not to say that gameplay-wise the dungeons weren't distinct, because this game does make you use the job system to a certain extent. And there, like for example, there are dungeons where you have to be miniaturized, where you have to cast the mini spell on your entire party and go through a dungeon as a small person who doesn't have any can't attack physically, so you have to do all mage parties and just hope you can get through the dungeon before you run out of spell charges, stuff like that, where it was just, you know, and I mean those were kind of annoying, but at the same time it was, you know, it was impressive. It was like, okay, we have this system you've created, and now you're forcing me to make intelligent use of it, and so that was kind of fun. My only problem with the job system, outside of my inability to make decisions for myself, is that, I mean, the idea is supposed to be change your party based on what you need. But since you can't really change on the fly, you can't change out of battle, you get to like this really, you've quested through a dungeon for an hour or so and there's still no save points. This is the last Final Fantasy game that doesn't have save points. You get through the whole dungeon, get to a boss, and then realize, oh, I should have been this all along, and now I'm gonna die. And you have to do the whole thing over again. Thankfully, I didn't really run into situations that were that bad. I did, once again, use H.C. Bailey's Let's Plays, although I mostly just watch what he did after I did mine. I didn't want to, you know, be completely, you know, dependent on that. But I'd do a dungeon, then I'd go back and watch his, and his Let's Play of that particular section, and think, oh, okay, I guess I could have done that, or oh, I missed that treasure, I gotta go back and do that. And there were a few times at the end where I did sort of spoil myself, because I really didn't want to go through the multiple dungeons of the end and have to redo them all over again, but especially after my experience with Final Fantasy II. If you remember that, I had to play through the final dungeons 4 times, I believe. I died twice, the power went out the 3rd time, and then I finally got it on the 4th try. That's just hours of my life that I don't have time to do. So even though I did not use save states, once again, I refused to use save states. But I did want to play it fairly in terms of the, you know, didn't want to use any glitches or cheats or, you know, codes, but, you know, I would get help on occasion. But it's funny, I think I've heard quite a bit that Final Fantasy III is the hardest of the 8-bit games, if not the hardest Final Fantasy at all, in general. But I found this one to be a lot easier than 2, to be perfectly honest, or even 1. I was terrified. Absolutely terrified of the final dungeons. I'd read so many unpleasant things. There were so many dungeons, and there were this boss gauntlet at the end, and I was expecting to have another experience like Final Fantasy II, where I would just, you know, want to tear my hair out and just think about all the hours that I've wasted of my life that I'm never going to get back. I'm going to you get into some kind of random encounter against this one particular enemy that's going to completely kill me, and all of my progress is done, and I beat it on the first try. I didn't have any trouble. I didn't get a game over a single time in this game. I found it a lot easier than either of its predecessors. I don't know if that was just me or just because I had enough information going in that I knew what I was doing, that the only really fun story that I have of my tales of valor and woe was trying to get Ninja and Sage, because it is in a dungeon you don't have to go to. It's the ancient city of Eureka, and it's a huge dungeon, and it has all the legendary weapons in there. Each one's guarded by a boss, and it's just sort of scattered. Like, you know, you'll get about halfway through, you'll find the first one, and then all the rest of them are sort of, you'll come across them as you keep on going, and then at the very end, you'll get the last legendary weapon and the Ninja and Sage job classes. And that was the only time I ever had any problem. It's like because there was that one enemy that was driving me crazy. It was Sleipnir, assuming this is translated right, which for me that's the horse that Odin rides, isn't it? But now they're random encounters just by themselves. There's tons of them, tons of Sleipnirs. And for some reason, and again I don't know if this is based in the mythology, I've never heard of it certainly, but Sleipnirs turn you into toads. I wouldn't have made that connection. I wouldn't have thought a horse would turn me into a toad. Whatever. But they would do that, and then they would wail on the character they turned into a toad, who has no physical defense as a toad. So they turn me into a toad, knock out that character, and go to town. And so I never was in danger of dying, but just I had to use so many spell charges to revive them and heal them and blah 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 blah, that by the time I got to the first legendary weapon, which is about halfway through the dungeon, and beat that boss, I was afraid. I wasn't sure if I'd be able to make it through the rest of this dungeon before I ran out of spell charges. So I was like, okay, well, maybe I should just leave the dungeon now, save my progress, and start over again, and just really plow through the first half, and you know, with the experience I've gained, then it'll be a lot easier. You can't use exit in the ancient city of Eureka, so I was faced with a very difficult and scary choice, because again, no save points, I didn't use save states, so I'm like, should I try to turn around and leave the dungeon the way I came in, and then save up, rest up, and do it all over again, or should I try to go forward and hope that I have enough to because either way, it's like I've been using a lot of spells, do I have enough to, it's that point of no return kind of thing that was in my head, where it's like, oh god, how far can I go in before I don't have enough to get back out again? And it's just, it's one of those fun, terrible RPG experiences. But this was one of the ones I did sort of use help from HC Bailey, and I did know that at the end of this dungeon, there was a door. And behind that door was a healing spring. No enemy encounters, there were shops, there were healing springs, I could rest up. And so my thought was, if I just make a straight beeline for that door, don't worry about the legendary weapons, and just focus on getting to that door, then maybe I can heal up, turn back around, and on the way out, get all the legendary weapons and the job classes and you know, all that kind of stuff. But I knew in his Let's Play, he waited until he had gotten everything before he went through the door. Even though 2 of the weapons are right next to the door. And so part of me is thinking, well, why didn't he just heal up first and make things a little bit easier for himself? What if the door doesn't open unless you get everything first? What if I have to get all the legendary weapons before I can go through the door? So I'll walk all this way, pass all the weapons, get to the door only to say it's locked. And then I just wasted even more time and more of my spell charges and more of my stamina to get there, only to screw myself over even further and probably die on the way back out and lose everything. So that was terrifying. I ultimately decided to take a chance on that, and I actually made it through the second half. Seemed a lot easier than the first half, especially when you're skipping the bosses. I didn't see sleep nears as much. I got to the door, I made it, it opened, I healed up, and I'm like, oh, okay, that wasn't so bad. And on the way back out, I got all the rest of the, I got Ninja and Sage, and I got the rest of the weapons, and it really wasn't that hard. So that's like my only really big memory from this game, because everything else is pretty easy. The final dungeons weren't as hard as I thought they were going to be, especially when I had Ninja and Sage. I think I might have overleveled a little bit more than I needed to, more than I got kind of confused as to what I needed to do. So I ended up, I just breezed through the final bosses. It was sort of like the 4 fiends in Final Fantasy 1. You fight them all together, and they were all pretty easy. And even the final boss was easy. But again, I knew what to do. I used my ninjas to throw shurikens, and I had my sages heal, although I cast Bahamut a couple of times. That was nice too. And it went down in just a few rounds. So I actually found this game to be fairly easy. I just don't know if I got lucky or or what. This game was the first to have an antagonist that actually had some kind of backstory to him. He wasn't just evil like Garland / Chaos or the Emperor Palamecia. There's not much, and you don't meet Zandy until the end of the game when you kill him. It's kind of anticlimactic in that way, but you know, he has a story. It says there were 3 mages and apprentices of the Archmage Noah, and when he passed on, he gave gifts to his 3 students. He gave Dorga the power of all of magic. He gave Una the power of the dream world, and he for Zandy he gave the gift of mortality. Which in and of itself seems kind of silly because Dorga and Una die at some point in the game, so obviously they're all kind of mortal, so that's a really crappy gift if that's all he got. So apparently he got upset about that and decided to unleash the cloud of darkness to swallow up the world, etc., etc. It's pretty simple stuff. But I was kind of surprised you don't meet him until the end. You see him, oh hi, I'm going to kill you. And then I killed him in like 1 or 2 rounds, and then that was it. Then he was gone, and then he gets replaced by the cloud of darkness, but Zandy doesn't really do much of anything. System mechanics-wise, this game really made some strides over the previous games. It doesn't have the ineffective attacks anymore. It will auto-target to other enemies. If two people target somebody and one person kills them, the other person won't just slash thin air. But magic still won't auto-target, so that's something I always thought made it seem like it was a precision they made on purpose rather than something they couldn't do. It is a bit easier to buy equipment. It still isn't completely obvious. It doesn't tell you what the difference in certain stats are until you equip it. The rows they improved on quite a bit, because I remember I complained about this in the second game, where it's, in the first two games, changing your party formation was done through a different menu by hitting select. And when a character died in Final Fantasy II, they were put in the back row. And even when you revived them, they still stayed in the back row. And you couldn't tell from the main menu that they were in the back row until you got into battle, and all of a sudden you found that your melee person was in the back row and couldn't do anything. Because in the rows in those games, if you were in the back row, you couldn't physically attack at all. And you can't change in mid-battle. So that was a really big pain in the butt in Final Fantasy II, and they mostly fixed that for Final Fantasy III. First of all, the rows act more like they do in later games, where it's just, if you're in the back, you do half damage, rather than not being able to attack at all. You can change rows in battle, and you can change rows in the main menu, and you can tell in the menu what row your character is in at any time. There isn't a second separate menu anymore. The only problem I had, though, was that when you would change rows in battle, that would be considered a permanent change. In later games, if you changed them in battle, like if you were back attacked and had to change your rows around, it wouldn't matter. But in this game, you are permanently... And so I get into a back attack, I change my character's rows around. And then I finish the battle, and then I get in the next battle and find, oh my god, why is my mage in the front row now? Because it sticks in this game. This is the only game it does that, because apparently I wasn't the only person who was annoyed by that. But overall, it was much better, handled much better than Final Fantasy II. They tried to make switching jobs kind of easy, but it didn't really work out that well, I didn't think. They would, you had to de-equip your equipment first before it would let you change jobs. It wouldn't just take it off for you. Even though there is a remove command in the equipment subscreen, that still got kind of annoying. So it's like, oh, I'm gonna change my fighter into a white wizard. We'll go to the menu, go to job, scroll down to white wizard, hit A, and it would say, oh no, you can't change jobs unless with equipment on you. So I back out of that menu. I'd go to equipment. I would go down to the remove command. I'd hit remove, and it would say, oh, there's not enough room in your inventory. So I go to my inventory, which is full of stuff I was going to equip my person with when I changed jobs. I have to clear out space. So can I sell this? Can I get rid of this? Can I use this? Clear out enough space. Go back to equipment. Hit remove. Go back to job. Change the job. Go back to equip. Re-equip everything. And God, that could just... It made me happy that I couldn't change jobs as much as... I wasn't expected to change jobs all that often. That was kind of annoying. 5 makes changing jobs effortless by comparison. But overall, I've really enjoyed doing the 8-bit Final Fantasy trilogy. I'm glad I've finally gotten to play 2 and 3, which I never had before. And so now from here on out it will be actual memories I've had. I'm still going to be replaying the games, but these aren't all new games to me now. Moving on to Final Fantasy V, since I already did Final Fantasy IV, so I started out with that one. If you guys have played Final Fantasy III, either the Famicom version or the DS version, please share with me your Final Fantasy memories. So that's all I have to say about Final Fantasy III, and I will see you next time. See you later!